Welcome, everyone. My name is Sierra Sanchez, webinar producer for today's conversation. Before we start, I wanted to encourage you all to connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's conversation, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce the conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we'd love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here, and feel free to share your thoughts and insights throughout the duration of the webinar. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the conversation to respond to the questions you post. This webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as any resources, slides, and bios, will be sent in a follow-up email to all who registered. And lastly, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This updated poll helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. And before we start, I just wanted to turn your attention to some of our upcoming webinars. Next week on February 27th, we have the next session in our Big Bets Working Conversation series, focusing on Not Without Teachers, intentional teacher development for improved student outcomes. This will delve into different aspects and approaches to teacher development. On Tuesday, March 5th, we'll start off the month of March with a Kindergarten Matters session focused on identifying and supporting children with learning differences, particularly in the kindergarten year, to ensure that they're set up for success both in their later elementary years and beyond. And on March 12th, we have an exciting doubleheader, first with the Crucible of Practice Salon on family engagement strategies with Learn to Earn Dayton, and then another Big Bets Working Conversation on expanded learning, expanded recovery, how after-school programs drive student progress. More information and registration links for these sessions will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope that you can join us. And joining you now is Emily Samos, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you, Sierra, and welcome to each and every one of you. And thank you so much for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesday webinar titled How Summer Learning's Resurgence and Maximization has Accelerated in-School Learning. As many of you know at this point, our Big Bets Working series aims to revisit the programs and strategies that CGLR has deemed Big Bet worthy because we believe, based on data and evidence, that they hold the promise of delivering more than the usual increments of progress towards transformative change for young students. And today we will explore how one of the most prominent recovery strategies, summer learning, is definitely working in terms of advancing students' progress. And in fact, CGLR has long held summer learning as a primary strategy for early school success and ensuring students are reading at grade level because it combats the dangerous summer slide that students experience when schools are closed. And with this background knowledge, in that first summer after schools were shut down during the pandemic, summer learning became even more critical and had a major resurgence of importance for students as the summer slide grew into the pandemic slide. Accordingly, the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER, included a $22 billion set aside in support of comprehensive after-school and summer enrichment for states and districts to deploy. These funds help programs to maximize their impact, and after 3+ years, we now have data and evidence demonstrating exactly how the investment is accelerating student progress. And today we get to explore the landscape of this impact, as well as specific examples of where and how summer learning is accelerating students' in-school learning. We are joined by both national researchers and experts who are familiar with the landscape of programs and can share the bright spots across the country, along with state and district leaders who have had great success in accelerating student learning and can share what makes their programs effective, including the state and district policies that support quality summer learning, as well as how districts are recruiting and retaining students throughout the summer, how they're partnering with community-based programs, engaging with parents and families, and combining time for academics and time for enrichment and fun in the summer. And so today's discussion will be moderated by Tracy Potts, who chairs the advisory board of Learning Heroes and has been a champion and prominent voice in support of summer learning. She is also executive director of the Eisenhower Institute at Gettysburg College and previously spent 3 decades as an award-winning broadcast journalist, most recently as senior Washington correspondent for NBC News Channel. She has also served on the National PTA Board of Directors. And so we'll get to hear from her in a minute, but now I'd like to take a minute to briefly introduce our esteemed panelists. And just a reminder that full bios are linked in the chat. And so I'm just going to do a quick preview of who we have with us today. We have Matthew Brewster, who is the Director of Instructional Staff Development for the Newark Board of Education in Newark, New Jersey, where he is responsible for overseeing and coordinating the professional growth and development of the teachers and administrators in all of Newark's 64 schools. We have Aaron Dworkin, who is the CEO of the National Summer Learning Association, where he leads a team supporting a wide array of 20,000 plus education and youth development leaders and organizations all committed to providing every young person in America, regardless of their income, zip code, and background, with a high-quality summer learning experience. Dr. Eric Mackey serves as the Alabama State Superintendent of Education, and since being named State Superintendent in 2018, Mackey is focused on innovative initiatives outlined in their strategic plan, Alabama Achieves, including the Alabama Literacy Act, which you'll get to hear more about, STEM, career technical education, and workforce development, among much more. Dr. Andrew Maxey is Director of Strategic Initiatives with Tuscaloosa City Schools in Alabama, so knows Dr. Mackey as well, and is obsessed with a few issues in education, including effective grading practices, middle-level practice informed by deep knowledge of young adolescents, and educational leadership. He is especially vocal about the complexity of teaching and the ongoing deprofessionalization of teaching. And finally, Polly Singh is a senior program officer for youth development at the Wallace Foundation, where she oversees grants primarily in Wallace's expanded learning and strengthening financial management initiatives. She also helps manage strongnonprofits.org, a Wallace website that shares best practices in financial management for after-school providers. So welcome to all of you. We are so excited to have you, and we look forward to learning from you. And I'm now very excited to turn it over to Tracy Potts to get our conversation going.
Thanks, Emily, and hi, everyone. It's great to have you here today. I'm really excited about this conversation because it is something near and dear to my heart. And I often like to really start out on a very basic level. I'm here because I'm a parent. A parent of 3 kids and now 2 grandchildren. And so I often talk about when I've been working in educational advocacy. And when I talk to parents and educators, I often talk about this 3-legged stool that is responsible for the achievement of our kids, which begins, of course, with our children. And giving them agency and advocacy in terms of their own achievement. Obviously, educators are a big part of it, and families, parents and families who are supporting kids are a huge part of this. That's how I got into this work. We are invested in this work, and so I'm looking forward later to talking a little bit about that. Emily mentioned that I now play a volunteer advisory role with Learning Heroes. We have been really involved in this. I chaired the Go Beyond Grades campaign with Learning Heroes because a big part of these big bets is making sure that families are educated and informed about their roles in that. So we'll get into that. One of the things that we learned in our research is that when families know what's going on, they act. We found that they were twice as likely to act when they were actually aware of ways to support their children's learning. One of those ways that we're going to dig into today is summer learning. And so I'm very pleased to start this conversation with Dr. Mackey. Dr. Mackey, I know you have a super busy schedule as the state superintendent, but very pleased that you were able to join us for the first half hour of this conversation. And I'm wondering if, by the way, I started my career in Alabama, and I ended up being an education reporter as a journalist. So it's almost like a full circle getting an opportunity to talk to you about Alabama schools. I wonder if you might begin really by sort of laying the land for us about your state's investment in summer learning. Tell us a little bit about the why, how it's helping, and what you're doing on a state level to support school districts.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tracy, for having me today. And if you you get tired of whatever great things you're doing, you want to come back, we're always glad to have you back in Alabama, you and your children. So we're doing we think some amazing things. Certainly the federal funds that we received through the first two rounds of ESSER and then the ARPA funds have really helped us to accelerate the work. In Alabama, we are working under two acts now to try to improve literacy in math. So the Alabama Literacy Act was the first, and that was passed right my first year in office, and I'm now in my sixth year. So we began to say, we know what things we need to do to help children learn to read at exceptional levels, at a minimum on grade level, but certainly we all want students to be, as high in the grade level as they can be. But we know what it takes to get students there. We know that it's very difficult, though, with many students, especially our students who may have learning disabilities, but also students who come from impoverished backgrounds, who don't have the support systems at home, who don't have the preschool experiences that they need. So the Alabama Literacy Act gives us some extra tools to help these schools and to help these children to accelerate learning. We now also, a couple of years later, passed the Alabama Numeracy Act, maybe 3 years later. And so we're just beginning to implement some of the things from numeracy. We learned a lot from literacy. But one of the things that we are very proud of is a big summer program. This last year, we had about 30,000 students involved in summer reading camps. We don't call them summer school. In fact, I'm the one who sometimes drops the ball there and says summer school, but it's summer reading camps. We want them to be different. We want them to be certainly instructional, high quality. We look at the materials we're using. We do an assessment at the end of camp to see if students have achieved greater reading levels, but we don't want it to feel like school. We want it to feel more like it's a summer camp experience. Our law requires that students do 70 hours of instruction if they are kind of mandated to go to summer reading camp. Now, we have a lot of students, depending on the school district, what their capacity is. We have a lot of students who aren't say mandated, and some of them actually are not reading below grade level either. But it's an opportunity for their parents to bring them somewhere so that they're going to get some enrichment during the summer. In most of our camps, we also have afternoon programs. I know Dr. Max is going to talk in a little bit about Tuscaloosa City Schools, and they really are an exemplar in how to do it right, so that you're blending the academic piece and also the fun stuff that actually draws students and keeps them engaged in the summer. But we're doing that, and again, we had about 30,000 students. I just want to share one other stat, Tracy, and I know you got more specific questions, but it's interesting. So what we learned this last year is that the earlier we get students, the folks on this call already know this, so I'm verifying what you know from your personal experience and research, the earlier we get them, the easier it is to catch them up. So our kindergarten students who came to summer reading camp showed about twice as much growth as our third graders who came to summer reading camp. So we know that the growth, the earlier we can get them into accelerated programs, the more growth we can see in that investment of time. And of course, we will have some students who come multiple years. So they may come in kindergarten and they pick up some ground, but they also still need they're still struggling. And so they may come back the next year and so forth, so on. We do want to make sure that by the time students pass to fourth grade, they're on grade level. And that's of course a big deal to us, but we want to make sure they're beyond that. You know, there's that, all of us in assessment know there's that magic score. So if you're a 436, not a 434, then yay, you're on grade level, you pass. But we all know that statistically, students who are, a full standard deviation below or above that cut score still can be struggling. So we want to make sure that we touch those students and that we continue to support them through summer school, also after school programs. But I'm not supposed to get into that yet, but I know that's something this group is very interested in. We've also really begun to invest in after school because some parents just cannot do summer school.
Yeah, I love that point that you made, Dr. Mackey, really about setting the bar higher than the basic minimum, but then also investing to make sure that we can help our children get there. You also mentioned the Literacy Act, so I'm glad that you did. I was going to ask you about that, and the Numeracy Act that you added to that as well. It's interesting because the law if I heard you correctly, the law requires for students who are at a certain level that summer instruction of 70 hours. It is still a process to create that, to get them there, to get the buy-in from the families. You so accurately explained that it's summer camp, not summer school. Look, I had a kid who told me every year, Mom, it's summer break for a reason. It's time to take a break from the learning. But we educators and we parents understand that summer slide is real, and we have to make it fun to continue that learning. So I'm wondering if you might share with us a little bit too about how professional development plays into this, because this is not only an opportunity for students, but it's also an opportunity for your teachers and administrators to practice some new skills or new curricula during the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to make sure that our teachers are well trained. And I use that word specifically. One, we want to make sure we have certified reading teachers in our summer reading program. A lot of students go to summer programs. Some of them are really good as far as their student focus, but they may have college students who are looking for a summer job, or somebody who's a practice teacher, like they want to become a teacher. And those are the folks running their camp experience. Well, we want to make sure that in these camps, we have certified reading teachers who are well trained. We use the LETTERS program in Alabama, although we're not alone. A lot of states are using the LETTERS program. We want all of our summer readings teachers to be LETTERS trained or to be trained in the science of reading. We want to make sure that they also have some good professional development, though, in summer learning. So again, it's so important that the summer program is not just a repeat of what students have had during the school year, but in a compressed time frame. It really does have to be different. It has to be, it's hard for me to say what I'm going to say, because we want school to be engaging every day, but it has to be kind of engaging at the next level, on steroids, if you will, in the summer to get students to come. And that is important. So we make sure that teachers are trained both in using the material that they have for summer and also in how to work on a summer program. And we want teachers to work together in groups. It's very important that they see this as kind of a collegial investment, and the students that they're touching their lives, that they're really working together, usually with a much smaller group of students. So again, it's a concentrated group, young people. Sometimes they don't know these young people. Remember that too. I know folks on here know. So you spend all year with your students. You kind of know your students. You know their personalities, their emotional states, and what they bring to the table and what they need. But these summer camps, we're combining kids from multiple grades, or not multiple grades, multiple classrooms, and sometimes from multiple schools. So I'm going in and I have 3 weeks of summer reading camp. I really don't have time to get to know those students like I do my students throughout the school year. And so it's very important that teachers immediately engage with those students, that we have smaller classroom settings, and that we, as much as possible, get parents to buy into the summer programming too.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And I love what you said about, and I see that there's some comments as well in the chat about making summer fun. Yes, we educators want to and hope that school is always fun. But that's not always the perspective of students. And so certainly for the summer, we want to make sure, not only for the students, but also for the really hardworking educators, that this is a different kind of experience. I'm looking forward to pulling Aaron and Polly into this conversation in just a moment, but I did want to also ask you, because I know you have limited time with us today, about what happens beyond grade 3. You touched on this a little bit earlier, about wanting to make sure, as the Campaign for Grade Level Reading does, that students are proficient by the time they are in the middle of elementary school. But what happens when students are still struggling beyond that, and how might summer learning be useful or helpful to them?
Yeah, that's something we're still working on. So we do have summer programs for grade 4 beyond grade 3, but it's not as much. It is not funded through our Literacy Act. So we don't have really good metrics for what to do with those students as far as summer and after school programming, and also highly successful tutoring programs for those 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. We've actually asked our legislature this year for a grant program to, and I'm hoping they fund it, to go into the most challenged schools where we have the most students in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade who are still either below grade level, or they get promoted on a good cause exemption, or they, for whatever reason, they become a struggling reader in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. So they were on grade level, but for whatever reason, there are many of them, they may have slipped below that, and they're still struggling readers. We want to build some programs out, and what we're proposing is to go to our schools and work hand in hand with them, where that might be a summer learning program. It might also be an after school program. We really want to build that out with students. Now, we do know that we have a lot of really good partners who help us offer summer programming beyond grade 3, but more and more of that does become a partnership program where we have a community provider, a youth organization that has a summer program, and they work with us to bring some academics into those summer programs. The older students get, the more difficult it is. We all know that, because parents want a place for their students to go, but then they all of a sudden also become more engaged in sports and other activities. And so it's more difficult to get them to focus on academics in the summer as they get older. It's something we're concerned about. We are working on. We do have some strong pilots around the state, but not anything that's statewide consistent.
I appreciate your transparency about that, because as we acknowledge where we need to go and what we need to work on, it gives us an opportunity to advocate for funding and to advocate for different types of programs. So great start here. So you've really sort of started us off by helping us understand the importance of the federal ESSER funds, how they've been implemented in your state, how the law that was implemented in Alabama is really setting the foundation for how these programs are designed. And I think you made a perfect transition to Aaron, and I want to bring Aaron into the conversation as Polly as well while you're still here. I call Aaron Mr. Summer Learning. We had an opportunity to work together on a project with some students and attend his conference last fall, and it was great. So you talk about the importance of those partnerships, and a lot of those, Aaron, are the organizations and the people that you're working with. Weigh in a little bit on how this landscape that Superintendent Mackey has outlined for us applies to the people who you work with in the National Summer Learning Association.
Sure. Well, thank you, Tracy. And I'm not Mr. Summer Learning. Everyone here is a Mr. and Mrs. Summer Learning on this call and in this audience. So thank you, everyone, for even showing up and thinking about and working hard on this topic starting now, months in advance, which is what it takes. Thank you, Superintendent Mackey. I've had the honor and pleasure of meeting you a few times in different spaces and hearing about your inspiring work, which, regardless of your political stripes, the White House had to highlight best leadership examples and best practices. And they highlighted, Superintendent Mackey in Alabama, and said these are models that we should all be learning from. So I just think, a lot of attention is being put on this, but there's a lot of work to be done. And I think we're all very clear-eyed on some of the challenges: absenteeism, mental health issues, physical health issues. I mean, so things, we always say we want to get back to what it was like before COVID, but before COVID wasn't always so great for so many people, especially our most vulnerable students, which we know. I look forward to hearing from Andrew and Tuscaloosa and Matthew as well, who have great examples. And so with so much funding going to states and to districts, they had this added responsibility of having to take on phone calls and incoming ideas and partners. Everybody wanted to work with a State Department of Education and a school district, saying, "Hey, you have resources, we have curriculum, we have volunteers, tutoring, like we said, we have facilities that can be used." And so we've just seen this explosion of partnerships that have to be following the lead of our of our districts and our teachers and our schools, because they're setting the academic agenda and everybody wants to be aligned and supportive. We don't want to have 1,001 people all working with similar kids, but in different directions. And so it's really important that we know that, you know, from the districts and from the principals and from the teachers, or what is it that they're prioritizing? And then how can everyone else chip in here? And not everyone else does everything great. Kids have lots of needs, and it takes all of us to meet those needs. So, you know, some people are great at teaching reading, and some people are great at teaching soccer, and some people are great at teaching music, and some people have access to a museum. And so, but how do you tie it all together? And normally we didn't have the resources, but in this, you know, response to COVID, there were resources. But what mattered more than the resources was the partnership building and the leadership to tie it all together. And we give out national awards. And again, you'll hear from Andrew, who just won our national award, because they really did weave in all the community, the city, all the cultural, you know, resources of the community, and, you know, volunteers, and bring them together in support of the students and the teachers. So I think we have lots of examples, and those partnerships have built up so much momentum that they should be able to continue regardless of what our financial situation.
And it's important, Aaron, for those partnerships to happen at different levels, right? So at the national level, at the state level, Dr. Mackey, as you have explained, and at the local level. So later, I'm looking forward to, I'm putting Andrew and Matthew on notice, because I'm really looking forward to hearing from you about maybe how those partnerships have played out at your level. One of the things that Dr. Mackey brought up early on was the federal funding, but private funding is extremely important. And private funders are often partners, very important partners in this work. So I want to bring Polly into the conversation, and I want to talk a little bit about the Wallace Foundation and why you have found it important to invest in summer learning.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I am humbled. I feel so privileged to be part of this esteemed panel. Really, thank you so much to the CGLR team for hosting us today, and to talk about one of my most favorite topics, summer learning, right? So we know that students spend most of their time, about 80% of their time, outside of the school, right? So outside of the school day. So, I mean, a lot of what Dr. Mackey was talking to and about, and Aaron also mentioned attendance, is we want to use time differently. And that's why Wallace has invested in summer so heavily. We've invested in summer for over 15 years now, because we want to offer more opportunities for learning outside of the regular school year. So when you think about whole child development, sometimes schools are the safest place for kids, right? Especially during the summer when childcare is often not present. And so they have a meal. They're surrounded by adults trained to do their jobs. And we have to talk about academic gains, right? So we know that academics are what schools are held accountable for. And so we ran the National Summer Learning Project. It was the largest randomized control trial of its kind in 5 large school districts across the country. We saw effects in math and in reading. And the gains were most prominent in our highest attenders. So after the first summer, the math gains showed up immediately. After the second summer, we saw gains in both reading and math, and they were sustained. So we saw about 20 to 25% of a year's worth of education. So 3 to 4 months of skills gain that was sustained for an entire year in young people. And so Dr. Mackey made a point about having professionals in this classroom. The science of learning, the science of literacy, the science of numeracy, those skills need practice. And so during summer learning time, young kids just get more practice with those skills, which is such an important facet of summer learning. In addition to that, I just wanted to, really emphasize the importance of whole child development. We saw during the pandemic, the food insecurity was a huge issue. Mental health crises and those kinds of things were affecting our children. It was further amplified. And so now we're seeing a whole child approach taking place where kids are able to get access to more and different services through schools, thankfully to the ESSER dollars, which has brought in additional supports for after school and for summer. It's emphasized on partnership as well, so that schools can take advantage of resources within their communities and bring those resources to their young kids. I've spoken quite a bit. All of these resources are on our website. So the National Summer Learning Project, all of the findings from that study are on our website. The Summer Learning Toolkit also shows tools, resources, all the how-to guides on how to pull off a well-done summer learning program. You need about 20 days of instruction in that time, and you need to make it fun, to Dr. Mackey's point, right? So you need to have not just reading and math, but swimming, other things, fun games, so that young people can have a whole holistic kind of experience in addition to their academic practice sessions.
Holly, I think you have given at least the first, if not one of the bumper sticker quotes of the day, which is you've got 20 days of instruction and you need to make it fun. And that's so important. It does echo what we heard from Dr. Mackey. By the way, I'd mentioned that he had another engagement, so he had to hop off a couple of minutes early. We greatly appreciate him spending that time with us and really showing us from a statewide level what those investments look like. You brought up something that I want to dig into a bit. First of all, thank you for sharing some of the findings from your research. I was going to ask you about that because I think it's really important for making the case not only for educators and for districts, but also for families, right? It's really important for people to understand that this not only matters, but it works. And we can see that when we see that research. But you brought up the whole child development, and you brought up many of the things that I, as a parent advocate in my own district, dealt with. You know, the first thing that we dealt with when COVID happened was, how do you get meals to kids, right? We spent the first couple of months just dealing with that. And I'm wondering, Erin, I want to bring you back in, and I'm wondering if you might weigh in with your membership and the people you work with the National Summer Learning Association. How much focus is there on that when we talk about creating robust and impactful summer learning? How much of that also includes dealing with things like meals, transportation, you know, all of the reasons behind attendance? This is not all happening in a vacuum. Learning doesn't happen in a vacuum, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It requires everything you said. This is why, even though it sounds simple, it's so much more complicated to execute. This is why you do need to start these conversations and planning conversations way earlier. And it takes everybody. And everybody has different strengths to contribute. Like you're saying, you could have all the funding, you have the great curriculum. If you have no transportation and no one could get there, you don't have a good program. You know, you could have, exactly, you could have all the other pieces. If you don't have the teachers, and the money to pay them, then you have a challenge. If you know, it's like all these different things. And by the way, summer brings some unique challenges in a lot of parts of America. And with, you know, the temperatures getting higher, it is extremely hot. The air conditioning bill alone is hard to keep a school building open in some parts of this country. So where do you got to go? So now you have to work with your parks department. You have to work outside. You have to find some other opportunities. So it takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of coordination is the name of the game. Around summer learning. This is what it is, because there's a lot of also unlikely and new partners that you didn't even realize you have. And especially as young people get old, we work with students who become in the older grades, we are seeing so many examples of like medical schools and hospitals and colleges who are, you know, offering their facilities and their staff to be involved, museums, libraries. We work, you know, Emily and CGLR, we work closely with them on engaging public housing authorities. So students are in lots of different spaces and we have to bring them together. And I just want to say on the partnerships, and you talk about our membership, our network is really what it is. And it's, I'd say a third, thousands of districts and schools, but it's also all these nonprofit, community, local groups. And then we have what I refer to as these youth-serving government agencies, like I was just saying, libraries, parks and rec, public housing. And then as students become older, it becomes summer youth employment. And you get all these employers and corporations that want to get involved and will pay students to get credit and take classes as long as they'll come and work and intern for them later. So there's a lot to weave, but I leave people with hope not to be overwhelmed because you have a lot of allies and you have a lot of partners. And we do a good job pretty much at the national level connecting, but the real work where the students are is at the local level. And that's where we need to kind of keep investing resources around the coordination, which, you know, GLR does a great job of.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that in, Aaron, because you hit on, you're starting to get into my brain and answer the questions before I ask them, which is great. That's always a good thing. But you hit on one of the things that I was thinking about for the people who are on this webinar, for those who may view it later, practical tips and practical advice on how to make this happen on a local level. That's like gold. That's invaluable. And I think you've given us a large list of people that people can think about tapping. So who among those people that you talked about, maybe a couple worth reemphasizing, if I am a leader at a district, or if I am a youth serving program and I'm looking to stand up a summer learning program, but I need help, I need support, like who is it that you would suggest that maybe people don't typically think of that they might reach out to as a strong partner?
Well, again, I'll let Andrew and Matthew kind of share from their perspective, but if your district has somebody who has summer learning in their kind of job responsibility or title, better yet, which we're seeing more and more of, that's the person to start with. Find that person, see if you can get a meeting. But it's interesting. We have Wallace Foundation, and I can't be remiss if I don't thank them for being the amazing leader and partner and supporter of all of us on this call in this field. But there are foundations. There are program officers at the community level, community foundations who are focused on education. They could get all the right people around a table in that community early on. So you might reach out to the program officer at the big foundation that funds education in your community and say, hey, who are the right people? They will know. And they'll bring together the district, you bring together the foundation. I would also call the mayor's office. And in every community, there is somebody, there might be a deputy mayor for education or youth development. That's a person you want around the table because they have all those government agency support services and they know where the buses are and they know where the fields are, but they don't know what you're working on. So if you could get government, nonprofit, business, and then the last, I would say Chamber of Commerce or your local business community, because they, especially whether it's internships or volunteering, or they have resources, they have facilities, you'd be surprised. People don't want to go to their offices so much. They got conference rooms. You got a lot of things to utilize right now in our communities if people are creative about pulling it together.
Look, I work in Washington, D.C. We've got so much empty office space right now. That's, and I think that's happening all over because post-COVID, we're all kind of trying to figure out, where do I work? Do I go into the office? Do I work from home? Do I do sort of a hybrid? But there are opportunities around there. And I think you bring up a really good point about bringing in the business community. Andrew, I saw you weighed in about the Chamber of Commerce. Emily weighed in about the United Way. They often have great connections that can support this. And I do want to bring Andrew and Matthew into the conversation. But Polly, I did want to go back and ask you. So you talked a little bit about your research. Aaron mentioned program officers and the people who work for foundations who look for these great opportunities to support. What do you look for as potential that really makes a summer program work?
What do I look for? I think, so Aaron named some of this, is when a district has a point person that it is their job to run the summer program, that is so critical. Like you need a point person, you need staffing, someone who's responsible for carrying out those mechanisms, those partnerships that have to happen to understand which school buildings are going to be open that summer. What bus company runs that summer that they can partner with, how to coordinate the USDA, the meals for that, the lunches, how to bring in the Y potentially, the Boys and Girls Clubs, other community partners, mom and pop shops that are open that can send in personnel, because teachers will need supports to run programming in your schools for the summer. So I'm absolutely looking for my school district to have somebody represented. And luckily, Andrew and Matthew are on this. They're both part of our learning communities, our district summer learning community. We have a state level one as well that's run by Aaron, of course, and our friends at CCSSO. FHI 360 is running our district summer learning effort. So I'm typically looking for staff. I'm looking for budget set aside funding. Sometimes they have summer youth employment programming happening within a school. It just depends on within a community what's available. If they have a department of community development, youth and community development, where they can run their out of school time programming through that office, that's also something to look for as well. And sometimes it's not your typical provider. It's the Parks Department that's running the program, right? So it's just depending on where the partnership is hosted, how it's hosted. A number of them showed up in the chat here as well. United Ways, I've seen those as well. It's just depending on the community. Sometimes it's faith-based community. It's a faith-based organization within a community that has access. So it really is variable, but don't give up, right? Keep looking for that partner within your community. And I think the trend that I'm noticing over the last 3-4 years is that schools are looking for more supports and community partnership within their community to give them that added support. And we want to set our schools up for success. Absolutely want to see districts, teachers get the support that they need so that they can better support young people.
Holly, that's really helpful, because I think that oftentimes people are thinking, who's going to help us pay for this, right? Who's going to help us fund it? But what I'm hearing you say is that at a local level, maybe even also at a state level, that what you need to see is like some commitment and some structure that's in place that is going to help support that investment, right? So staffing, a dedicated coordinator. I saw someone mention that in the chat. Some level of budget for this, right? Some partnerships that could be helpful, that allows the Wallace Foundation or maybe other community foundations, as Aaron talked about, to come in and really sort of boost what's already there with that foundation. So we keep mentioning Matthew and Andrew. So let's bring Matthew and Andrew into the conversation. Andrew, your state superintendent, was here. And so we're really eager to hear what this has looked like. I also saw a lot of head nodding with you too. So I know that there's, we're in sync with what your experience has been, but talk to me a little bit about what your experience has been like with Tuscaloosa City Schools. What does this look like for you on the ground?
Thanks again for the opportunity to be part of this. So part of our experience here is a partial answer to what you just asked, Polly, which is, I think you have to start, if you're a district, if you're a school looking at this, you have to start with belief. The question for us was, do we believe the research about summer learning loss? And if we do, what should we do about that? To me, if you don't believe that summer learning loss is a price that's too steep to pay, then I think you can just move on with your conversations about other things. But if you accept that the loss that occurs for students, particularly that students who are academically vulnerable lose more learning when they're away from school, it just comes down to, we simply can't afford that. We can't afford, we can't reach our mission if we continue to operate that way. And then if you accept that, well, that's an unacceptable loss, the question of what we should do must be guided by best practice as described in the research, contextualize to your local situation. So to me, Aaron was talking about how complicated it is. The why to me is very simple. It's, we can't successfully fulfill our mission as school districts if we continue to tolerate the high cost of summer learning loss. And then we've talked about the fun of summer learning a couple of times today. I completely agree with that. That's how we do things. And that's also evidence-based. We're not doing fun because we are big proponents of fun. Of course, that has its own value, and there's whole research data sets about the value of joy, for example. But in the design of summer learning, we talk about doing things that way because no program has value where kids don't come and they don't want to be there. And by the way, you can try to compel attendance to summer learning, and have to come and actually coming are not the same thing. So let's talk about the research that also says until an individual student attends at least 20 days, there's no statistically significant benefit to them. You can't make a kid come enough times. You've got to get them and convince them and pull them in. So for us, I'm going long. I need to stop, and Matthew, give me that little signal we've agreed on. Like our thing
Wait, you
was,
guys had secret signals that I didn't hear about?
well, this is our third or fourth time presenting together. We're
Fair
pals.
enough.
But
Fair
you know,
enough.
it's just that you have to follow what the research says works best. And if you are a true student of what that says, there's room in that. For example, we have summer learning in our district is singular. We have 21st century programs funded with 21st century. Across all our elementary schools, we are bound by the state numeracy and literacy numeracy and literacy laws. We don't have different programs. We don't have enrichment programs and remediation programs. We have summer learning, and summer learning is key for all students. So what's good for some students is good for all students. There's a whole bunch of nuance in there, so that at the instructional level, at the classroom level, there's differentiation, but at the program level and at the public facing, student parent facing view, these are summer learning is one. And it's a thing that has where you start is making this so valuable to your community. The answer to some of the people asking, how do you fund it? The answer is, when your community decides you want it, it's going to happen. So
Yeah.
of course we're pursuing all the grants that are available, but we also have local support as well.
So Matthew, I'm going to ask you to come on and hop in here, but Andrew, I think you bring up such an interesting point. Matthew, maybe you want to touch on this. Look, my background is communications, and so the lens through which I look at a lot of things is, however good something is, how do you market it to the people who need to jump in and get involved? You talked about selling summer learning, so to speak, to the kids, but you know what the kids don't do? They don't drive. Right. And they don't always wake themselves up. You also, to get there, you also really have to convince the families, the parents and the families that are supporting these kids that, yes, the law may say that you're required to do, as the superintendent said, 70 hours of instruction, but like somebody's going to make that happen. And so I think on the very basic local level, we have to create ways of marketing, maybe that's a better term than selling, but marketing summer learning to families so they think, oh, it's not just because my kid is behind, or this is going to work. This is going to help me out. So Matthew, what's that look like in Newark?
But, in addition to all of that, you have to make sure that you're providing resources and supports to parents, right? You want to make sure that they know that transportation is available. We want to make sure that we're going to serve meals. We make sure that we have certified teachers. We're going to, get the advertising out earlier so that people know all the things that are happening with their program. So it's really, really important to communicate early and let everyone know what's coming down the pike for their kids.
So I want to ask you both. I'll start with you, Matthew, very specifically. What's your summer learning? First of all, what prompted you in Newark to really jump into this, and what do your summer learning programs and opportunities look like?
Well, we all talked about the impact of the pandemic, right? Student loss, learning loss during that time was pretty tremendous. And so we had to do something extra to help boost kids' academic achievement. And so we followed the research, particularly out of the Chicago Consortium for Educational Research that talked about expanded learning time, after school time, increased tutoring was going to help boost students' achievement. In addition to that, we followed our own strategic plan. Our own strategic plan talks about developing a cognitive learning approach to pedagogy and instruction that deepens the understanding of science of learning and centralizes knowledge building as a core to improving academic achievement. If that's going to happen during the school year, then we said we got to do the same thing in the summertime. Andrew talked about the fact that, you got to have kids there for 20 days. Our program is 25 days. If we're going to make that 25 days count, then we have to make sure that the leaders who are leading our program and our teachers that are teaching in our program are serious about that time.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the teachers, and maybe either one of you feel free to hop in, because the superintendent talked about, kids going to school all year and then having to do summer school, so to speak. But our educators, especially in the last few years, it's been extremely challenging for them. I kind of feel like we need to make it fun for them too, even though it's part of their work and part of what they're investing in the kids in the community. But how do you recruit, and how do you provide professional development, and how do you make sure that teachers and educators are all in with this? Either of you.
I'll try to be brief this time. We not only don't have a shortage of applicants, we have a surplus of applicants to work in the summer. We think there are 3 specific reasons for that. One, we pay teachers at least as much as they could make in any other summer job. What we've avoided is paying them so much that when we have to scale back from ESSER, we lose all our people. So we didn't, that's not just ESSER dollars we're spending on that. Two, teachers have a great deal of autonomy. They help decide exactly how they will teach, what the contexts are, and they help make decisions. And number three, we're extremely flexible. We go to specific teachers and say, we want you to work summer learning. There's no pressure. They say, we got to be at the beach on the 3rd week of June. We'll say, fine, we would rather have 15 days with you than 0 days with you. Oh, you can only work half a day. We will figure that out. We'll make that work on our end. So for us, the main purpose of summer learning is to shield students from learning loss, but it has also become an incubator space for us, for adults, that they get to do those things that bring them joy. They get to rekindle some of that passion they have. Because if you're starting from the perspective that we're looking at grade level standards and making it highly engaging for kids, it's the thing that a lot of people came to teaching for in the first place. They want students to have joy in their learning. And for us, saying the main goal here is to keep the students' mind very active. What can you do to keep their brain ticking over as high an RPM as possible during the summer? You help us figure that out. That's been a key for us.
Wow. Matthew,
I was going to say
how's that looking in Newark?
the flexibility has been really, really important for us as well. But in addition to that, what teachers really appreciate in the summertime is being able to teach, right? And not having all of the other things that come along with, the regular school year involved in their program. And so, the coaches are able to coach, the counselors are able to come in and do counseling and provide social, emotional support. Teachers really, really appreciate that. And the feedback that we get from teachers when we did our surveys, when we do our focus groups, they're telling us, you guys need to do what you're doing in the summertime, you do the same thing during the regular school year. Very, very difficult, but we've really made it a priority to make sure that the summer learning is about summer learning and that we remove all the distractions and give teachers the tools they need to teach and the leaders the tools they need to lead.
And so I want to ask all of you really at this point, a lot of this, and the superintendent started off talking about the ESSER investments and the ESSER funding. So ESSER is going away at some point soon. And we all really now need to start transitioning and thinking about, we've seen levels of success, right? Polly talked about it, and the successes they've seen in the programs that they've supported in funding. Aaron has talked about this. You've both talked about this. How do we sustain it? How do we sustain it now on local levels, on state levels? What plans are in place to make sure that these successful programs that we've seen continue beyond, next fall and beyond the extended deadlines for ESSER funding? So Polly, Aaron, and all of you, I would love your thoughts on jumping in. What are you seeing and what are the conversations happening now about sustaining this success?
Polly, do you want to go first?
I think that, so I named some of this, having staff, even if you can have staff share that role, not just for summer, but for after school. I think when you see a year-round approach, when it's part of a year-round of planning supports, then it's not seen as like a thing that can be spun off on its own, right? So the goal is to try to have it all be integrated as one. Summer be part of your school year and not as the separate thing that happens. Oh, it's just this thing that happens. No, you want to plan for an entire year, like a year-round approach. So it doesn't feel like something that you can immediately cut from the get-go. That's hard though, right? So it's a real huge shift for districts who are just accustomed to running for that 10-month period, the 180 days. Some of them are less, depending on where they're located in our country. So just recognizing that the shift has to happen, but it can be slow, and it could also be at the pace that, just take it easy on your staffing too, because you're shifting a lot of dynamics for staff, and your entire budget has to get reworked. So yeah, I'm gonna stop there because I know I'm saying a lot right now. And I'm
No,
looking
but you're saying a lot of good stuff, Holly. And I think what I'm hearing you say is now is the time. And this is a good time to have the conversation, right? We're not having the conversation a year from now, but start shoring up and building that structure and building that foundation for the continuation of summer learning. Aaron, you were gonna hop in before
Yeah,
Bob.
no, I'll add braiding resources. I sit at a very 30,000 foot high level here. There's a lot of different buckets of funding out there. In your bucket, you might be like, I don't have enough. But when you add the school district funding that it has with the Office of Juvenile Justice, that has a mentoring dollars with the library money, it's like it adds up. We're all trying to serve the same students, families, and neighborhoods. Ultimately, there's a lot of inefficiencies here. This is why we do need some more connection and connectivity, especially again, as I talk about doers, we got people like Andrew and Matthew who work directly with students. We have renewers, we have the people who invest in those people, poly, funders, researchers, policy people. And then what we need more of always are gluers, the people who are going to tie this together. And money is part of the thing you're tying together. And I'm not saying we haven't, we always want more money, and if we more money, we'll do more good things. But I'm just saying that there are dollars, and there's just some pockets here of maybe the transportation doesn't have to come out of Andrew's budget, because the Parks and Rec has 1,000 vans that are sitting in a parking lot right now in the summer months that aren't being driven. And they're like, we could donate those. And then the food budget, maybe there are restaurants and there are caterers who are like, we will do. So this is kind of, people have what they could give, and everyone wants to give to kids. I joke, I have a friend, he's a dentist. No one volunteers at his office. No one comes and says, can I help out at your dental office? But my friend who's a principal, everyone calls him all day long and says, can I come and volunteer at your school? So I just think we have a lot of allies. It's hard when we're so busy on our one thing to lift up and say who, and we went through the list of people who can help us do that. But I just think there are a lot of resources, but Andrew's point of it's either good or it's not. And if it's good, people will want it, and students will show up, and parents will show up, and funding will show up.
Yeah, I love that somebody just Linda looks like is taking the words out of my mouth in terms of community players and talking about the business community, right? There are a lot of certainly on the local level, but definitely on the national level, companies who have little armies of employees who are waiting to go out and do good in the community, right? And tapping those as volunteers, as supports, maybe they're not teaching your summer learning classes, but maybe they are helping with some of the enrichment activities. Maybe they're bringing new skills in to help with students. Maybe they're helping serve lunch. There's just a lot of, I love the idea that you brought in, Aaron, about braiding resources, because that visually makes sense to me, right? Pulling them together in a way that they work together to support the goal. The doers, the gluers, all of those folks. And Sharisa earlier, I saw this pop up in the chat, mentioned family engagement. So that's my thing. That's been my long-term focus. And again, what we found at Learning Heroes, when we did that Go Beyond Grades campaign, was that when families see the value, like when they get it, when they understand, they absolutely do and will take action. And we saw that in a very real way. Parents were twice as, and I say families because not everybody is supported by a parent, but families were twice as likely to act and support things that supported their kids' learning when they actually saw the value of the achievement. So you're all really right on that. So I think I want to remind everyone that to use the Q&A feature, we're going to, in a couple of minutes, start looking at your questions, because we've got a wealth of knowledge with the folks that we have here today. And I'm looking forward to unleashing them on you to answer some of these questions. But I wonder if there are any practical things that we should be thinking about in addition to what we've already talked about as we look into, timing of what's happening with the ESSER dollars, right? So now is the time to have this conversation, as I said, not, a year from now. Are there any practical things that we should be thinking about on the district level, state level, maybe also certainly on the national level, but particularly the district and state level, about changes that can be made now? Polly, you brought in embedding staff to really focus on this. Are there other things that we should be thinking about doing, say, in the next 6 to 8 months?
I mean, Aaron talked about braiding funding, but there's also the whole concept of reallocating and looking differently how you use dollars in the past. One of the things that we're doing a little bit differently this year, going into 2024, that'll probably continue moving forward, is changing the way we use our partners. Our partners are always going to be an important part of our program, but instead of relying on them solely to do some of the enrichment activities, we want to engage them differently and kind of provide them with resources to do other things and bring in our teachers to be part of teaching that program. So, just looking differently is how you use the dollars that you already have rather than always looking for new. I mean, new dollars is great, but sometimes you have to change how you use the dollars you already have in your hand.
And I will piggyback on that you already have. We should think of that from a community perspective. So it's not free for students to stay home during the summer. Someone is paying money for them to do the things they do in the summer, if only to feed them. So our communities do have money that they're spending on students in the summer. We're talking about maximizing that time and working together on this. You asked for some, what we should be doing. Here's a suggestion. Ask your parents what they want in the summer space for their kids, and then interview them when you give them those things and play those interviews back to them and say, look, we're doing the thing you wanted. Oh, by the way, there's research that said the thing you actually want is what we were supposed to do. Parents want it to be full day. Parents want it to be fun. Parents want it to be, I don't care where you are. If you ask parents what they want, they're going to tell you the things that should happen. But set yourself up for a promises made, promises delivered situation. And then when your community buys into what you're doing, they will help you make this case. In Tuscaloosa, one of the things someone earlier mentioned, the mayor's office, we've been at this work for about 5 or 6 years. Our city included summer learning in a tax increase a few years ago. And so there's municipal support for this, because think of it from their perspective. Think of it from the perspective of law enforcement and health services and things like that. If young people are safe and are well during the summer, that has value to a community. So think beyond just the traditional, who's the person with a giant pot of money and where are there resources in the community that we can work together to make this all work.
I love what you both said, because this and some other comments earlier reminded me of some work I've done for a very long time with National PTA Center for Family Engagement on the National Standards for Family School Partnerships that many of you may be well aware of. But one of those standards is collaborating with community. And I bet one of our super smart people is going to Google this and pop it in the chat in a sec. But one of the national standards is also sharing power. Right. And bringing everybody who has a stake in this in. We often talk about nothing about us without us. But part of sharing that power is bringing the families in and creating that accountability that you talked about, Andrew. Ask families, what is it that you want for your children in the summer, and then include them in the process of creating that. And that's really kind of the family engagement work that I've been involved in so long, and that inspires me. But now here's a new platform and a new opportunity for us to do that in the summer learning space as well. So I'm going to ask we're going to turn to questions in a few minutes, but any final thoughts and comments, like what's that thing that maybe has been in the back of your mind for all of you that you've been thinking about that we haven't talked about yet, or something that you wanted to add to the conversation?
I'm just popping on to ask Erin to give a little plug for your summer planning boot camp, because I posted it in the chat, but great to hear from you, because I think you are going to have sessions on braiding funding and stuff, right?
All of this
Yeah.
is true. Thank you, Emily. Everyone here is invited March 6th and 7th. We are doing 2 hours a day of just panels with experts and local practitioners who know all the ins and outs on these hot button topics. March 6th and 7th from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern time each day. Hopefully put that in. It's free of charge. Great folks, great resources for everyone to access. So I don't want to jump in there, Tracy. The last thing I'll just add, and then everyone else, will be about there's a role for intermediaries. It's a weird term. I'm one, People don't always know what it means, but in every state and in many cities and communities, we have them. United Way acts as one, but there are state after-school networks statewide. We have probably some of them on this call, and then at the city level, there are these. Every Hour Counts is a group, a coalition of these citywide intermediaries, and they are doing amazing work on the funding, on the policy, on the training, and bringing people together and identifying needs, doing research. Where are the gaps? Like Matthew and Andrew could say, if you look at your entire city, some areas and neighborhoods have a lot of programs and resources and some don't. Okay, well, we need to know that so you can make data informed decisions. And then you bring all these, that's a lot of work that these intermediaries do often. And so I just want to encourage everyone to find them. Again, there's a state after school network you could tap into, and there's these Every Hour Counts. Will have all your local cities, and we're seeing great examples of what they're able to get done. Boston being a great example of getting 200 nonprofits working in coordination with Boston Public Schools and kind of pulling it all together.
If I'm not mistaken, Aaron, we had some folks, when I came to the National Summer Learning Conference last fall, we had some folks who were in our public housing workshop that you did, Emily, who were from Boston Public Schools. And we were talking at our table about how they pulled some of those resources together. Really good examples. Emily, I saw you posted that in the chat earlier. Public housing can certainly be a really, really good partner in this.
And
All right,
Tracy,
Polly, final thoughts?
Sorry, Tracy. I just want to say one last thing, one real fast thing, which is a distinction between being school district aligned and school building based. And it's not always the case that we want to be aligned. We want to follow the lead of Matthew and Andrew and their team, but it can happen. The program can take place at the museum. It can take place at the college campus. It could take place somewhere else. And that's something that a lot of cities have figured out how to do well. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I love the comment in the comments about think different, right? We can think differently about how we've done this. Final thoughts, Polly?
I was just going to, so to your point about strategic communications and sharing power, young people know what they want, right? So if you ask kids, what do you want to do this summer? Guess what? They will tell you what they want to do, right? And they actually will go, I mean, parents, families, they have a tremendous amount of influence on their young people. And many times they will go to that program because they're listening to their family's influence. They have an older sibling, a cousin, someone in that program, neighbors' kids. They want to go, they want to be in community. So I would listen to your kids, listen to your student, your young person, because they do have voice, they do have choice. And that is also a quality marker. When you look at when we talk about program quality, it is a key marker if you're listening to your young person's student voice and choice. I posted the recruitment guide in the chat. Don't underestimate the role of strategic communications. If you're posting data points on your website, listen, we have X amount of slots available this summer. Let's make sure every single student seat is filled this summer. Guess what? They're going to get filled. All right. That's all.
Polly, that's a really good thing. And that's actually how I first got involved in Learning Heroes Go Beyond Grades campaign, because there was so much money out there early on and in the middle of the pandemic, and seats for great summer learning programs were not being filled. And that was part of why we launched this nationwide campaign, to make sure that we communicated to families and to educators to kind of have those conversations so that, teachers aren't signing kids up for these programs. Families are signing kids up for these programs, to make sure that those conversations were happening, so that the educator was saying, look, I think your kid could really benefit from this. And then the family member, parent or otherwise, would go, oh, okay, I see the benefit of this. And I cannot overstate the value of what you said, Polly. Can we give the kids some agency in this? I've often said, hey, when we talk about families, you remember the kids are part of the family, right? And so it's so important that we give the kids some agency in this, because not only does it help with designing effective summer learning programs that they will be interested in, but in the long term, it really teaches them a great lesson about advocacy and their community, their own community engagement. All right, Andrew, you get the next to the last word, and then Matthew, and then would love to open it up for some questions.
That's a dangerous thing to do with me. In case you haven't worked this out.
But we're gonna give the signal, right? You have a signal.
I was super disappointed to hear that this only lasts, what was this, an hour and a half or an hour? So no, listen, y'all, like to me, it starts with a commitment, but then it also really passionately believe in the power of summer learning to carry weight for you. That we've talked a lot about the positive academic impact, but we've just produced a document that we've shared with our community and happy to share with others about the other things. Yeah, look there, Aaron, your green screen, but he has it. But kind of the other positive effects it has. We've mentioned it being an incubator space for us before, for the adults. For us, it has been a place where we develop leadership for our building level leaders. It has really done wonders for our relationship with community organizations. Like there are people engaging with the district who don't really engage with us during the school year. And the list goes on in those areas. Like that's, to me, that's not why you do summer learning, but it has the capacity. It's kind of like, to Polly's point earlier, it's like the frontier of unclaimed real estate in time that the district, it doesn't have a claim on this space. So as districts entering into that space and then being a little bit more free with how we engage families, community organizations, partners, etc., and keeping your eye on the ball of what we're trying to accomplish there, and then following the research. And then it's got to be, what's your local context? So Matthew and I have said before, like, whatever you do, don't cut and paste what we do, because we're following the model. And so, in fact, our programs are quite different from each other. It's just that we both believe in the power of this and we're making it work in our context.
Well, and they will be different if we're all listening to our community and responding to the unique needs of our community. And I love that you brought in that while these may be our big goals, that there are all of these other side benefits from as Emily would love for me to say, big bets that are working. Okay, Matthew, you get the last word, and then we're gonna turn it over to Emily because I see we've got some questions, which is great.
Okay, so I just want to piggyback on Polly's comments about collaborative planning and early planning. You know, our superintendent called our first summer planning meeting on September 1st of this past school year to start planning for 2024. And we've continued those meetings on a monthly basis with representatives from academics and operational, many of whom are on this call today. And just getting that whole concept of we're working throughout the course of the year all the way through the summer, that we're not ending the school year, starting summer, stopping summer, then starting the new school year. We're drawing this through line between what happens from one year to the next. And our Office of Teaching and Learning, the directors and the supervisors that work in that office are embedded in our summer program. They're piloting the curriculum, they're training teachers, they're helping administrators become better instructional leaders. All of that happens in the school year. It happens in the summertime. It happens again in the fall. And that's the concept that we want to highlight that's making our program successful.
Fantastic. I feel like if I am a district level leader, a state level leader, a community partner, a parent who is on this webinar today, I've gotten some really good practical advice of some things that I can think about doing going forward to making this sustainable. All right, Emily, you're up. I know we've got some questions.
Yeah, and actually, you know, I'm just so glad that obviously all of you, but Andrew and Matt having that on the ground. So this question is actually like from an anonymous attendee, really interesting. So we've talked about partnerships, but tell us, like, what are the key elements of forming a partnership between a school district and a community-based organization? Like, what are the barriers and what are the solutions? You know, like, get down to the brass tacks here. Tell us how that goes.
Okay, you're gonna face the issue of territorialism, because we all think that well, first of all, we want to make sure that our program, our thing doesn't get starved. And we have this scarcity mindset that I have to hog the kids and the money and the everything, or else my thing might get shut down. And districts, we think we know better than the other folks. And so let's just be honest, we're going to be hard-headed if you try to come tell us what we think should happen. So to me, those are barriers you're really going to have to face. I think the key is, if we're in alignment with this, if this is, summer learning is not a silver bullet, but I have a hard time thinking of who summer learning doesn't benefit. Really, I like to say it benefits the grumpy old man down the street because the kids are yelling at the school, not in his backyard. Like, truly, who is this not good for? So from that perspective, do not hear us say this is easy. It's very, very hard work. It takes a lot of time and effort to do. But the message is it's possible. You can do it. And if you stick to it, you can do this stuff. So to me, it's like, and by the way, the other thing is with district folks, if you're coming in, when we hear people say, we want to partner with you, that's almost always code for, we'd like you to give us money. So if you don't mean that, if you mean like, let's together go find funds, or let's together find something, that usually works a lot better for someone from inside the district. Like, do you mean partnership, or do you mean I'd like a slice of your pie that you have right now?
I mean, everything's
that is
all
so
about
true.
that quid pro quo. That's how, that's what helps. Like, give a little, earn a little. Matthew, do you have anything else you wanted to add?
I mean, I was just going to highlight the fact that, it's important to communicate with your partners early as well. We've already called our partners to the table, letting them know some of the changes that we're going to have coming down the pike, just so that no one is surprised. You don't want to, pop up in April or May talking about things are going to be different than they were in past years. You want to start having that conversation in October and November so that people can start preparing themselves for the next phase.
Can I just add to piggyback both, but Andrew's especially about the money. So I think that's real. That's just real, and everything you just said, both of you, is so true to everything my experience. But one thing we did, I deal with a lot of summer camps that often want to be helpful. They sit vacant many times for 9 months a year, and have a lot of great facilities and resources. So one thing, they were all trying to approach school districts when the ARP money, ESSER money came out. And of course, they didn't many of them didn't have relationships prior. So it was like you were calling a complete stranger. So that's, you can't just, the first time people hear from you, it can't be that, hi, can you give me something, right? You got to find a better way to build and start relationships. But aside from that, what we did was we gave them a pass-through grant, or we gave a grant to the summer camps to then approach their local school district, often, by the way, in rural settings. So I just, often we talk about urban, it's great, but there are a lot of rural communities that this is a big challenge and they need resources. But these summer camps are in rural settings. So what we did was we gave these $25,000 grants to summer camps and said, go to your school district and ask them to match it and work with you and to co-design a program together. And huge success. It created relationships, it created goodwill, it created all these opportunities right before the school year started, when the camp was over and it was vacant, all these great things, teachers and students together. And one of the relationships, Milwaukee Public Schools and the Boys and Girls Club summer camps, now the district is putting $7 million into creating all these camp partnerships with schools, all off a $50,000 thing. So it just shows you, it doesn't only take so much to get going, but you can't only, like you say, Andrew, you can't come and ask, I always say, if your neighbor won the lottery, but you never talked to them, and all of a sudden you came over and said, hi, you want to share some of your money with me? I don't think the answer would be too positive. So you got to find ways to make it win-win.
And,
Aaron, if you win the lottery, I'm knocking on your door one way or the other.
Okay, I'll share with everyone here. Don't worry.
That's such a really good point. And I remember hearing about that project when we were at the conference, and I was so fascinated by it. By the way, please don't forget, you probably just saw the GLR engagement poll pop up, and we really hope that you can engage with that poll and answer it, because it gives us a lot of really helpful and useful and valuable information. Just wanted to mention that real quickly, Emily.
Yeah, and I just want to add, we take those polls incredibly seriously. You would be surprised. We are breaking down the data. We're looking at that. So please just take 30 seconds, however long it takes. I'm just going to say, Kim Davenport, who asked a question about summer camp. Hope you just got that answer from Aaron, because that was a lot of talk about summer camp. I actually really, really appreciate this next question from Rachel Kaplan, who asked, how do you address the issue of equity? How do you ensure that communities that have fewer resources don't fall through the cracks? And I will just share, we just had one of the professional learning communities that NSLA manages is the one with housing authorities and public and affordable housing agencies. And I get to facilitate that. And the housing agency that came to the session from out in Oregon was talking about, even in their one set of communities, even in the housing authorities set of properties and services, like they have disparities where there's less access to services, less awareness of services. So I just think this is a really good question. How do you, in one, again, Matt and Andrew, like you're in one city, right? Like, how do you ensure equity across the city?
Well, one of the things that we do is we make sure in our planning process, we have representatives that come from different parts of the town, right? Our city is broken up into leadership teams, and each leadership team has a representative that sits on our planning committee. And so they know what's happening at their 12 or 13 schools that they oversee. And they know this school might need this resource more so than that resource, whatever the case may be. And so I think just having representation at the table when planning happens helps ensure equity.
Thank you for that. That's a great idea. Bring everybody to the table. Make sure everybody's represented.
Hey, Emily, do you mind if I hop in? I'm
course.
just wondering, Polly, if you have some thoughts as you look at funding programs and supporting programs, like what the foundation's thought is toward equity and how you consider that in deciding whether or not this is something that's worth supporting.
I absolutely echo Matthew's answer of bringing folks together to plan intentionally. The other thing I would add is data, right? So you want to bring information so that folks can make informed decisions. How many kids are we talking about, right? How much money do we have to spend? Where are the kids located and where are the programs located? And how can they meet, right? How can families find programs? Are the programs located in the neighborhood? Are they accessible? Those are the kinds of really low-hanging fruit questions that you can bring up when that committee meets and starts to make some decisions.
This is another really, this is a big question, so maybe not this is from G. Diogracius, I think I'm probably pronouncing that completely wrong, but and Polly, you might be the best person to answer this. Any partnerships or efforts to develop a nationally normed assessment that's appropriate for summer? I mean, it sounds like it's probably not possible, like knowing how different each city is, each district is, each community is, but just wondering if you have any sense of that kind of a possibility, some kind of assessment that can be used across the board.
I think it's a gap for sure, right? So our friends at CCSSO is definitely thinking these are the Council of Chief State School Officers. Once you build in what gets measured, gets funded, gets tracked, it's an accountability mechanism, right? So it's a really worthwhile question. It is a gap that I think that everyone is talking about. Aaron often mentions it. We do need assessments to show that summer is a time that we can show impacts on young kids are gaining from the efforts in summer. And once we can demonstrate that, there is no arguing with that information once it's readily available. And I think it will absolutely change the sector. I don't know of any current conversation but I imagine it is happening in communities, right? So they are looking at ways to measure it. The way that we measured it is just by disaggregating our students who participated in the summer program versus those who didn't.
And I would
I was going to say there was a question specifically about Tuscaloosa. So Andrew, please tell us what you're doing to measure.
Yeah. So and I want to advocate for this methodology that we use the existing standardized assessments. Like, what was the evidence that we used to know that the student needed help or was struggling academically? So we compare the spring assessment with the fall assessment. And the question is, what was the change or no change at the individual student level? And then of course we use other, there's survey data, there's, we do attendance and track climate data, that kind of thing. I would I don't think I'll be asked, but if I'm asked when there's a discussion about this anything national, I would recommend that it be pegged to that approach to say, and with no disrespect to anyone who's doing good work, if I have a pre and post assessment that's not tied into, remember the point we've made before about what's happening the whole school year. maybe that whole thing can be insulated from the larger work that we're doing in the district. I just think there needs to be a connection to what we're doing during the school year itself as well, so that you can be more confident that we're talking about summer in connection with the school year rather than summer in isolation.
And that's the only way you're going to continue to get support for summers, to demonstrate, and that's why we titled this webinar what we did, to demonstrate that you're making progress on in-school learning. And then I'm going to ask this question from Jen Soal, but also bring in Polly again, because, I know that we do have some really good tools for community-based, essentially community-based, but also district-based, like guidance for quality summer learning program. And Jen's question is, how are you going about community building and creating a sense of belonging for students who may be coming from disparate schools and grades? So building program culture is a huge part. So there's something called the Summer Learning Youth Program Quality Assessment that was developed by the Weikart Center. But I know the Summer Learning Project also has this elements to it. So Polly, I don't know if you want to touch on that just in response to Jen's question.
Absolutely. So we do have several toolkits that have adapted some of the tools on our website. So we have the National Summer Learning Project toolkit. We have a summer learning toolkit on our website. There's a district summer learning toolkit that I know that they're tackling. What does it take to adapt those tools, right? So we know what it took to pull off the National Summer Learning Project, but what happens in a rural school district? What happens in other parts of the country where they don't have access to the kinds of resources? How do you adapt those programming so that young people feel like they can attend those programs and still find community within those programming? There are a number of different tools on different websites. The Search Institute also has a number of different relationship frameworks and kinds of tools so that programs can build in and foster belonging in their setting. And I know Aaron probably has other programming that he knows of.
Yeah, well, look, there are a lot of quality assessment tools out there, just a ton. We also have a research learning community that dozens of people come to, each with their tools. Gil Noam at Harvard has his, his frameworks. Like you said, NSLA has worked with the Weikart Center on the ESSER summer learning program quality. So program quality for sure. But I think Andrew, again, I keep coming at Andrew and Matthew's point. It's like, we do this thing in education sometimes where we measure things we don't actually work on, which is also not good. So if you are somehow an arts program and a mental health support program, I don't know that measuring what the kids learn in math is going to be so great for you. And so you want to make sure you're using an assessment tool that aligns with whatever your focus is. And if it's math and reading, that's great, but like use the right tools and don't maybe assess how much their physical activity they're getting if that wasn't the thing you were most focused on. So it's funny. It sounds funny to say, but it actually happens more often than not. And so we want to make sure you do what you say and you measure what it is so you can learn to improve. And also, I think all of us are great here in that, like, we all want to get better. Sometimes there's such a fear. Oh, if this is new and if it doesn't come out great, that's okay. Like, then you adjust. And, and you can get a lot of people. And when we talk about unlikely allies who want to help you, you know how many education researchers at the local college want to come and work with you on this, and maybe a funder would pay for this too. So I just think if it's not your strong suit, that's okay. There are a lot of people who want to help you.
I mean, we only have 2 minutes left. And so I think we should probably say, close this down. Tracy, you just blow my mind. You're such an incredible moderator. Thank you for joining us and for the moderating, facilitating that excellent discussion. Thank you, Andrew and Matthew, for your kind of local perspective. I also want to thank Andrew for answering a bunch of questions in the Q&A, and also Superintendent Mackey, before he left, he also answered a question that was directed to him. So great to have him as well. Aaron, always great to have you. And Polly, you guys, we're going to ask you again and again, and probably Matthew and Andrew too. So thank you to you all so much. This has been an excellent session. If we didn't get to your question, I think we did get to all the questions. It's making me think we do have 2 minutes. So there was one more question, but if everybody can take 30 seconds. So the question is around safety, and I'll just, safety in the summer. safety for the students, safety for the teachers, you know, so really quick 30-second response to that.
When I saw that question, my response is this is one benefit for just using the existing protocols that a school and a district has. So even if you're partnering with a community-based organization, you can leverage those structures that already exist.
And that's really, really important for us here in the city as well. I talked about our planning team. Our director of safety and security sits on that planning team. So it's all part of the process.
Well, there you go. See, we got to every single question. I know there was probably some more. There was a lot of activity in the chat as we were going through those Q&A. So thank you everybody for posting in the chat, for your ideas. And thank you everybody for this really, really important discussion today. And we are going to have part 2 of this discussion on March 12th, focused on after school. Not yet. Oh, it is on there. But also please join us next week and the week after, and then come back again March 12th. We're going to have Jen Reinhardt from the After School Alliance, along with our colleagues from Foundations Inc., along with some local folks as well. Same kind of conversation, this time really focused on after school and what it takes to keep after school strong as well. So thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of the day and a good week.